We are going to get started in Genesis. Now, I've been trying to warn you at the beginning, and then while we sing, you can be thinking about it, and I failed to do that tonight, so I'm sorry. I'm learning that, if you ask me a question, I'm always ready with an answer right then. It might be the wrong one, but by golly, you're not going to catch me unawares. That's right. It might be a wrong answer, but I will have an answer. That's just me. That's just the people I came from. That's how I was raised, Always ready to stand and deliver.
How many prophecies on Jesus coming in the Old Testament?
In the Old Testament, loads and loads and loads and loads. Do you have a number?
I do.
Okay, what is the number?
Now, if you don't know, then you'll know what I tell you.
We're not talking about the whole Old Testament tonight.
Well, it is. The Old Testament tells us all about Jesus.
Tonight we are talking specifically about the first 5 books of the Bible.
What's that?
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
And?
Now, Jerry, spell Deuteronomy. It's easier for me to spell hard words if I'm writing them than it is for me to just orally do it. Now, Jerry had a question for me. How many prophecies are in the Old Testament? I got a question for you, Jerry. Are you going to include types or just direct prophecies? Direct prophecies. All right, I'm going to say 600.
How many?
600. No?
You're not even close.
Not even close, Jerry. Well, okay then, Mr. Smarty Pants. Go lower. 500.
How much?
500.
300. 200. A dozen?
Somewhere between a dozen and 300.
366.
366. Well, how about
I
that?
have a book at home, names prophets, I think it is. There's a lot of them. A book on the prophets.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
We pick on Isaiah a lot.
Yes. For unto us a son is born, and unto us a child is given.
Is it Michael?
There's Micah.
Micah.
And that's who Herod's scholars read to figure out that he was going to be born in Bethlehem. Malachi, surprisingly enough, and I wasn't super familiar with Malachi before this, but a friend of mine, a guy I know, pastors a big church in Arnold, Missouri, he had a sermon series called Malachi, the last word before the word, because it is the last book of the Old Testament and chronologically the latest prophet, and then 400 years of silence until Jesus is born. But it's interesting, in that sermon series, I noticed that there's a lot of these prophecies that we quote around Christmas time that come from the little book of Malachi, there at the end of the Bible. At the end of and Micah. Yes, and Micah. And Zechariah.
Well, most all of them got something.
You got something.
You go back to Daniel. You go back and look at all those.
Yep.
They have something to refer, but it's really hard to put in focus some of those because the culture was so different.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it is difficult, as you just said. I'm just going to repeat it in the microphone for you, that it's difficult to catch a prophecy sometimes because it meant something to the culture at that time. Doesn't necessarily mean the exact same thing to us today, at least.
Between the time prophecy and the time Mary had Jesus, the culture had really changed.
The culture had really changed. Yeah. A lot of things happened between Malachi and Bethlehem.
400 years.
400 years of political upheaval, entire empires rising and falling. Antiochus IV he was a ruler in the Seleucid dynasty, but that just, if people see a nasty old name like that, they just shut off. So I like to say he was king of Syria. He ruled over roughly the same area north of Israel that we would call Syria. And so he was the northern king, and he came down he was so disgusted at the Jews and their one God and their refusal to eat pork and everything. He wanted to conquer them, and he wanted to force them to be just as pagan as everybody else. He conquered the temple, the second temple that they had built after returning to the promised land and rebuilding the temple. He conquered. He sacrificed a pig on the altar to God, to Zeus. The altar that was intended to be to the one true God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, he sacrificed a pig to Zeus on it. When the Jews of that area, not really having a nation, so I don't really call them Israel at this time, but it was when the Jews who lived in Palestine banded together and revolted and overthrew him, they were led by a family that we call the Maccabees. That was actually an Aramaic word for the hammer family. It was hammer time, and they hammered old Antiochus out of there. They were Levites. They were Levites, but they were not of the priestly family within the Levites. And old man Maccabee was, the Romans or whoever was ruling at the time said, "Would you like to be high priest this year?" And he goes, "I'm not from the right clan, and I'm sick of you people trampling all over us." So he retreated to the hills and organized an uprising, and it was later his sons who finished off the uprising. They reconquered the area of the temple. Took 8 days. It took 8 days of cleansing rituals for the temple. If you remember back in the Old Testament law, in the book of Exodus, when they started up the tabernacle, when they built the tabernacle, they had a series of ceremonies in order to make it ready for temple service, tabernacle service, sacrifices and worshiping God and all that. So they redid all of those ceremonies to cleanse the temple from having a pig sacrificed in it and having Gentiles stomp all over it and all that kind of stuff. And the story of this rededication of the temple, the legend goes, they were supposed to fill up the candelabra in the holy place, not in the Holy of Holies, but outside of that in the holy place. The presence, the light of God's presence would shine on 12 loaves of bread that symbolize the 12 loaves of Israel. So the light of God's presence is always shining day and night, 24 hours on every tribe of Israel. That's where the showbread comes in, and that's where this menorah, this branched candle, this branched lamps comes in. They didn't have enough oil for it to be shining all 8 days. It was supposed to be lit for all 8 days of the cleansing rituals, but miraculously they lit it and it stayed lit as if it did have oil. So that was the miracle of Hanukkah, or dedication. And Jesus actually during his lifetime went to the temple and celebrated the rededication of the temple, an anniversary of that happening. And that's mentioned a couple of times. So Jesus celebrated Hanukkah, ironically. And the Jews still celebrate it. It's not a holiday prescribed in the law of Moses. It's not the Feast of Trumpets. It's not the Feast of Booths. It's not the Passover. It's not one of those feasts, but it's a holiday that they've come up with since then. Just like Esther, when they celebrate Purim to commemorate the day that Esther saved and God saved them from being annihilated in the Persian Empire. This is another one of those holidays that they've added. So,
and wasn't Jesus supposed to be a Nazarite?
Jesus was from Nazareth. And some people think, now Matthew says, as was foretold, he was from Nazareth. But where on earth in the Old Testament does it say that? It doesn't specifically say the Messiah is going to be from Nazareth. So some people think
But he's called a Nazarene.
he's called a Nazarene, and maybe that sounds close enough to Nazarite that it's the New Testament writer is trying to say he's a Nazarene, and that's just as good as being a Nazarite. Of course, we all know Jesus was special, and being a Nazarite's all about being special.
What I read, Nazarites come from the Danites. They were split off of the...
No, the Nazarites could be any tribe.
Yeah.
Samson was a Nazarite
Exactly.
from the tribe of Dan.
And
But
his strength was in what?
God,
In his hair.
in God, and God pulled it away when he cut his hair.
His downfall.
A woman. It was always
More than one.
there was more than one woman for Samson. It was always his downfall.
It wasn't supposed to be.
Yeah. Well, no, it was from the Philistines. They were always foreign women, and they dragged him. They were not a good influence on him. All right. So we've had a fun discussion so far about Jewish history and yeah. 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 A Nazarite could be from any tribe, but you would take a vow in order to be set aside for special service to God. Yeah. Now, where might we find Jesus in the first 5 books of the Old Testament? And there's a few easy ones, so I want to know if you're going to go for those. Actually, I have Genesis 2 here because, yes, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We're going to go over a couple of verses, even from the New Testament, where we see that the New Testament writers interpreted. I don't have my whiteboard up here, so try to follow along as best as you can. I didn't really have anything that needed to be written down on it. But we are going to go over some verses from the New Testament where those leaders of ours, the apostles and the biblical writers, they help us interpret the law of Moses through Jesus. And so in several places, they tell us that Jesus was present at creation and that through him all things were made. Now, more specifically, in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, the earth was out form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, if you really wanted to be very nitpicky, you could say that's not Jesus, the second member of the Trinity. That's not God the Son. That's God the Spirit that is there hovering over the face of the waters. And I would say you probably have a good point. So let's go on ahead to those New Testament scriptures where we talk about how Jesus is there and present. Our first one is Hebrews 11. And if you want to turn there, you may, but I do have it on the screen. Hebrews 11. And the writer of Hebrews tells us in Hebrews chapter 11, in verse 3, by faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. So we have a universe that we can see. We have solid objects. We have the turkeys that I watched all afternoon at the softball field out my back window. We have all the things that we can see, our vehicles, the car wrecks that happened, the fire, the stars at night, and it was made by things that we cannot see. Now, that one verse alone, if you want to say, that doesn't say Jesus was there. It just says the Word of God. Sure, we know John 1 calls Jesus the Word, but that's not really specifically there. Well, okay then, let's dial it back to Colossians. Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. I'm in Philippians, that means Colossians is to the right. All right. In Colossians 1:16, we read, for by him all things were created, and he's already been talking about Jesus for a paragraph, so him means Jesus. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And so Jesus is there at creation in no uncertain terms. Paul tells us in Colossians, and we think that the Christians in Colossae, the city of Colossae, were dealing with a lot of witchcraft and a lot of people that believe. Of course, in the Roman world, everybody believed in different levels of gods and various things out there. Only the Jews believed something different than that. But they seem to have been having special trouble with witchcraft and powerful beings and powerful people. And so Paul writes the book of Colossians to the Colossians to tell them, hey, whatever's out there, Jesus not only rules over it, but he created it to begin with. So even the fallen angels, even if there is a celestial hierarchy of beings that are big and scary to us, and even if many of them are fallen and they are sinful, and that's one of the reasons earth is so messed up, it doesn't matter. In the beginning when they were perfect because Jesus made them. And so Jesus rules over all of them. And of course, we have in John 1, if you want to go to John chapter 1. I preached on it last Sunday. Most specifically, John 1:3. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. And so Jesus, it's interesting. I think it's the Jehovah's Witnesses, because I had a friend of mine that I went to school with that was Jehovah's Witness, and she explained it that because Jesus existed before he was born, they think that's normal, and everybody exists before they're born, and everybody's up there waiting to be born and everything, and it's just, no. Jesus has special rules. I did not exist until I was conceived in my mother's womb. Jesus existed before Bethlehem because he is God. And he was present at creation, and without him, nothing was made that was made. Pit vipers, bison bulls, I'm just trying to think of large, powerful things. Mountains, sunsets, galaxies, nebula. Nothing was made without Jesus having a hand in it. And so, dinosaurs. I had a history teacher in high school, swore up and down they were fake. Dinosaurs, just plain fake. God made the world. Bible doesn't mention dinosaurs. Therefore, all the bones they've found, they faked them. And I said, okay.
My son-in-law is, his daughter is in research on bones up in Wyoming. Mm-hmm. She goes to college up there, University of Wyoming. Mm-hmm. And they found dinosaur bones in that area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a young man from Ashley's grandfather's church that I knew him when he was a kid, and I was going to school up there and going to that church. But anyways, he has grown up to become a paleontologist. Even when I knew him, he knew all the scientific names of all the dinosaurs. I mean, you couldn't stump him. You couldn't trick him into calling, oh, that's a meat eater. No, that's a Tyrannosaurus Rex, And so we'll have to get a hold of him sometime and see what he thinks about all that.
Do they still have some dinosaurs there down at Truman Lake at the Visitor Center?
I've not been there in ages.
You've never been there?
I haven't been there in ages. I think I've been there before.
A bunch of kids down there one time.
Is that the place that has the mastodon bones?
Yeah.
Mastodon bones down at Truman Lake? I'm sure I was there when I was a kid.
Well, it's been there a long time.
Yeah.
I think it's been there ever since the lake was built.
Probably.
When they put the dam in. But we took kids down there and they had 2 or 3 dinosaurs.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you what, Rexus or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know what their names are.
You got to learn those names. Kids love it.
All I know is Dino and Tyrannosaurus Rex.
Dino. Dino plays the piano down at Branson.
Long-necked giraffe.
Oh, Dino was the Sinclair dinosaur at the gas station. There you go. All right. So, earlier I mentioned something, and I guess I should explain it. Now, when we are talking about prophecies from the Old Testament, you got your regular old prophecy, like Isaiah says, he will be born of a virgin. Okay. When the Messiah comes, he will be born of a virgin. Straight. This is how it's going to be. This is what it's going to be like. The government will be on his shoulders. There's maybe a little bit of metaphor there, a little bit of symbolism, but you're just supposed to take it straight. I mentioned earlier something called a type. And I wish we could think of something else to call it. Because to me, that just sounds confusing. A type of Christ. Oh, there's different types? He's a type, that's right. He is a foreshadowing of Jesus, a type. Now, please understand, the reason we have the word type in English, and please think of the term typewriter. And the text on there is called type. That is the type. That is an impression. If you've ever looked over a typewriter real close, you've seen that there's those little engraved metal pieces. And when you press a key, boom, that metal piece stamps. That would be a good word for it, stamp, a stamp. And whatever is carved into that piece of metal is what you see because it has ink on it, stamped onto that paper. That is an impression or a stamp of whatever is engraved into that metal. The Greek word for that, and I don't know if you ever in art class made a wood cutting or a soft cutting where you made your own stamps. You ever draw a picture on a flat piece of something and then cut out around it? You can make your own stamp. Took typesetting in school. Okay.
That's pretty hard.
Type or tupos was the Greek word for exactly that kind of thing. You cut a picture into a flat surface here, you swab it with ink, and boom. On a flat piece of paper or a flat piece of wood, you can stamp something and you get the impression of whatever's on this. You can transfer the impression of what's on there. So when we talk, and we use that same word in biblical prophecy. So this is a special kind of prophecy where it doesn't specifically say, hey, someday there's coming a Messiah and it's going to look like this. We just see things in the Old Testament that are shaped, if you will, like Jesus and his ministry and his sacrificial death on the cross. And so in the Old Testament, we have this strange character that comes out of nowhere. This was Larry's example, named Melchizedek. He's a priest in Jerusalem during Abraham's time, which means that there is no temple, there is no tabernacle, there's no tribe of Levi. Levi isn't even born yet. And yet he is a priest in Jerusalem, and Abraham tithes to him. And you know what? Jesus is also a priest of the city of peace, which is what Jerusalem means. He is a priest of peace, not a catchy title, priest of peace, who even Abraham owes allegiance to. And so the writer of Hebrews takes this picture of this guy named Melchizedek and says, you know what, that's a lot like Jesus. God gave us this Old Testament character. We don't know where he came from. We don't know where he went. Just like Jesus. Jesus came from Mary, but let's be honest, he came from a lot more than that. And he doesn't come from anywhere, and he didn't go anywhere. Even when he died, he came back. And so he went somewhere, but not away, like a Melchizedek. He shows up, he's there. We don't even know if he died. It's not recorded in the Bible that he was born or that he died. And just like Jesus, he had no beginning and no end. And so it's a type. It's an impression. It's like we took the real Messiah and stamped the Old Testament, and you can see where something looks like the coming Messiah in the Old Testament. So when I say type, it doesn't mean there's different categories of Christs out there. There's only one Christ. No, there is a type of Christ where we take the true Christ and we stamp him on the Old Testament, and then we look, oh yes, I see the impression of Jesus, even though he wasn't there yet. I see the impression, something that looks like the coming Messiah. Now, I've taken all that time to explain that, to say, I'm going to do my best not to talk about the many types in the Moses law, okay? Because we could go crazy, right? Well, we are going to get to Moses because there is a verse that says, you will have a prophet like Moses. God will send to your people a prophet like Moses. But we could go crazy with the Passover lamb. you know. And of course, the New Testament makes a big deal out of that. The ark, we need to get on board Jesus if we want to be rescued from the coming destruction, just like how they had to get on the ark. Jesus is our ark of safety. I came across several of these preparing for this. Well, you know, and there's a lot of symbolism in all of the sacrifices and the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle, and Jesus is all over all of it, you know. So I'm trying to avoid. Now, as I got finished preparing for it and I looked it over, I thought, they're going to point out that some of these are, in fact, types, not necessarily straight prophecies. But the point tonight is that Jesus is not something that the later prophets came up with. Jesus is not, you know, sometimes it was David, sometimes it was those people that came along later that gave us a better picture of what the coming Messiah was going to be like. But I'm just wanting to talk to you tonight about how even in the books of Moses, way back here in the very beginning of the Bible, the first books of the Bible, we see that God had a plan already to send Jesus to die. The law of Moses was never going to save anybody. And God knew that. And God gave us the law of Moses in order to point forward to Jesus, because Jesus can save us. Jesus does save. The law of Moses relies on us to follow it. Jesus comes into our hearts and changes us from within. It's no longer relying on us. And thank God it doesn't rely on me, because I fail God every day. If my salvation depended on me, I would be in big trouble. Okay? Doesn't matter what kind of airs I put on up front, on the outward appearance of how good I'm doing. Just trust me, okay? If it was up to me to save myself by following God's law, I would be in big trouble. So I just wanted to tell you about types and things in order to help you understand when it comes to Old Testament prophecy, that kind of stuff is everywhere. And the more you study about Jesus and the more you study about the Old Testament, you just begin to see it everywhere. Jesus is everywhere. Let's get back to a specific prophecy about Jesus. Now, sometimes it's so vague that we might be able to argue about. We're going to go to Genesis 3:15, by the way.
Just think how difficult it is for missionaries to try to help those people know about Jesus in a way they can understand it, you know, in their culture and their way. I think that would be very difficult in some areas. Maybe in other areas, not as much. All depend on how, what I want to use the word, primitive they are.
Yeah.
Because as I hear from missionaries, there's a lot of groups out there that they have no idea their language.
Yeah.
Which
There's
would make it very difficult. And I was listening. Somebody was talking about mission work, and they go in there, and the little girl was wanting to know about Jesus, and her mama never heard about Jesus. So, you know, I don't know how she heard about Jesus.
right.
They were trying to figure out how to help that mother know about Jesus. And then, you know, so much pressure put on if you're a Muslim or one of those Hindus that you don't never talk about that. So them guys, them people's got a tremendous job ahead of them to try to decipher just what I'm thinking. When we have new people come in here and they hear what you're talking about, Murray and I can handle.
Right.
But for a new Christian, they would have no clue what's going on.
What we're talking about tonight.
That's why.
Yeah.
I just think it's would be way above a non-Christian that come in and was listening. You see what I'm saying? So
The non-Christian.
Well, I guess the way I look at it, a new Christian's got to be just like a baby.
Yeah.
You got to feed them slowly and help them to grow and to mature into a Christian. And I know, and I can't even think back, but I know, like I say, I've been in church since I was 5 years old because our parents said this. They didn't take us to church. we didn't get taught church anymore. And even though through my teenage years, I can't really say I went to church, but what reason? Did I know how much Bible had I read at that time? You probably read more Bible in the 6th grade than I read till my 20 years old.
I don't know, Jerry.
Well, you know what I'm saying? So for a new Christian, and you've got probably the hardest job with youth, trying to help them, especially if they come from a non-Christian home, to learn and understand what's going on.
Now yes, maybe they don't know what maybe they ought to know, but I'm going to tell you the hardest thing with the youth is getting them to open up. They're not stupid. They could learn all this stuff like that if they wanted to. But to show them that it's going to be worth their while in the first place, they got a lot of adults in their lives, and all those adults want them to do is to memorize what the adult wants to hear and tell them what the adult wants to hear. And it's very easy for them to assume that I'm just another one of those adults, that they tell me what I want to hear here at church, and then they tell their parents what the parents want to hear at home, and then they learn just enough about what the teachers want to hear to get by. And we were all like that at that age, but it's even worse now. Because you go to the school, and they've got an agenda, and they pump them full of the politically correct stuff. You better give the politically correct answer. Hey, do you feel this way, or do you think this? And so they learn how to speak that language. And then at home, mom and dad might... maybe mom and dad just want it quiet. And Bill Cosby always said, parents don't want justice, they want quiet. So we don't care why your sister is screaming. Whatever you're doing to make your sister scream, stop, And so the parents have their own language, so they learn how to make the parents happy. And then they come to church, and I want to tell them about Jesus, and I want to ask them, have you ever thought about your sin? Have you ever thought about your selfish motivations and stuff like that? And they're looking for whatever answer they can give me that's just going to shut me up and make me happy. And then they will have figured that out. And that's not what I want. I want to know what they really think, And I'm even going to try to correct it when it's sinful and selfish or wrong. But, sometimes that's do what?
And that's why they're resisting. If they're wrong, you're going to try to...
Yes, and if they know the truth is something I'm not going to like, or I'm going to try to correct them on, then, it's, I don't want to answer. I don't want to talk about this, or I don't want to do this anyway. This is stupid, or something like that, And so it's not about a lack of understanding. This is simple stuff. The baby was born in a manger, and he died for your sins, It's not about, they can catch up with whatever they need to learn, but to just convince them that, okay, there is a God, you need to submit to him, and that doesn't feel natural because the only person you were born wanting to submit to is you. And, but, hopefully as we tell them about Jesus, the Spirit of the Lord speaks to their heart. It's the only way. And that's why I don't mind talking about what a mountain we're up against, because, how do you get through that? Well, ultimately, it really isn't up to me. It's up to the Lord to convict them. And we try to tell it like it is from the Bible. Anyways, so Genesis 3:15, we read that the serpent talked the woman into eating the fruit, and she gave to her husband Adam, and God says to the serpent in chapter 3, verse 15, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And that is what we call the first gospel. And we use a Latinized Greek term in seminary, proto-evangelion, but really it's just the first gospel, the first version of the good news in the Bible. Someday is coming someone that is the seed of the woman, And so you could say all human beings are born of a woman. What do you mean? Well, it's more than just generally true about all human beings. Jesus really was born of just a woman with the virgin birth. And so you can see how this might be pointing to him. And Satan, the serpent, will bruise his ankle, his heel, but he turns around and bruises the head of the serpent. And a bruise in the head is a lot more dangerous than a bruise in the heel. And so some translations say, crush the head of the serpent. And so we call this technically the first prophecy of the coming Jesus, the first gospel, the first version of the gospel in the Bible. Now, if you're willing, or you can just look up on the screen, we are going to go to Galatians 3:16. Galatians 3:16. Now the promises were made to Abraham and to his offspring. It does not say, and to offsprings, referring to many, but referring to one, and to your offspring, who is Christ. And this is a collection. Paul here is referring to a collection of promises made to Father Abraham. And this might make a little more sense in the older translations that say seed. The promise is made to Abraham through his seed, and Paul actually makes the argument here that it was seed singular, not seed plural. And so this fulfillment of the promises to Abraham is not going to come through all of these many, many, many descendants of Abraham, so many of them that they're like the stars in the sky or the sands of the seashore. You can't count them. It comes through one seed of Abraham. Jesus Christ is the argument that Paul is making. So you can see how that could be kind of vague in the beginning, but Paul makes the argument from the fact that seed is singular, from the fact that offspring is singular, that what is coming is one man who will fulfill the promises of Abraham. In Genesis 12, don't forget one of the, we're going to that. Sorry, can't read my own handwriting. Genesis 12:3. This is one of the many promises God gave to Abraham. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, families could be nations, could be peoples, because that's how mankind tends to divide itself up into nations and peoples and clans and tribes. It's all based on usually on a family thing, but God, if you think about how racist the Jews in the time of Jesus were, it's better to be Jews for this time. It's better to be Jews for this reason or that reason. I'm not like a filthy Gentile. Oh, I can't come into your house right now. It's Passover and you're a Gentile and all this stuff. And yet, God promised to Abraham from the very beginning, in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, the Jewish people have gone out and done a number of fantastic things throughout history, but it all pales in comparison to what Jesus has done for all the nations of the earth, to make the sacrifice that has made it possible to be right with God. I just can't express this enough, that what Jesus did on the cross is for all people. All people. All different kinds of people. There will be people in heaven from every tribe, tongue, nation, language group. Whatever we divide ourselves amongst, there will be some from there in heaven. And And the Jews in Jesus' day were hung up on such a narrow version of God. You've not only have you got to be a Jew, you've got to be a really good Jew, and you've got to do this and you got to do that, and you got to follow all the little rules, because the little rules keep you from breaking all the big rules. And then on top of all that, we want you to have the right attitude about it. And Jesus says, Jesus points them back to what God originally said and originally meant when he was talking to Abraham. Through you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And so everybody, regardless of the color of their skin or whatever their family history was or whatever even that they have done themselves that should ruin their lives, they can be right with God. And they can be in heaven with him forever. All right. So yes, God foretold there would be the seed of the woman that crushes the head of the serpent. We get the story of creation where the Word of God is what makes the world and everything in the universe. And we get Abraham. Ever since Abraham, there has been a promise that there would be a descendant of Abraham that blesses all the earth. Let's take a detour over into Leviticus, if you want to turn over with me to Leviticus. Leviticus 14. Now, we're not going to read this whole passage, which makes me wonder why I told you could turn to it, but okay. There are laws concerning leprosy. And if you get a certain kind of lesion on your skin and it affects the hair, if the hair turns a certain color and everything, the priest looks it over. He tells you whether it's leprosy or not. And if it is leprosy, you got to go live outside of God's people. Now, I don't know if there were forms of leprosy that cleared up on their own. I've certainly never heard of any. But for some reason in chapter 14, we have a provision in the law of Moses. If your leprosy clears up, here's what you do. You either go to the priest, or since you can't go indoors, you ask a relative who comes out to bring you food or whatever and leave it somewhere. Hey, I'm looking a lot better. Can you have the priest come out here and look me over and tell me? And then for a whole chapter, for half a chapter, I guess, there are sacrifices to be made, even though you can see in your body that the leprosy is cleared up. You still have sacrifices to make, and there's rituals. But then, once all of that is done, you can go home. You can be with your family. You don't have to live in the leper colony anymore. And so, finally, it's all over. But since when was that ever a possibility? I've always kind of felt like when Jesus healed lepers, that was a big, big deal. And why else would we have provisions for whenever you are healed from your leprosy, unless the law of Moses saw Jesus coming? You know what I mean?
They must have had to go to the priest, because he said go to the priest.
Yes, they had to go to the priest. Yeah. That's what the law says.
Was practicing that in Jesus' time.
Yes. But what I'm saying is, why would the law talk about being healed from leprosy if no one can heal you from leprosy? You know? Until Jesus came, I can't imagine anybody got healed from leprosy. Yes, Larry?
The cure for leprosy is sulfur, isn't it?
Is it?
Laura, I don't know.
Can you cure leprosy with sulfur, Laura?
Not that I've never seen or heard of.
Vinegar.
Where's my phone?
Anyhow, whatever the case.
Yeah, vinegar. I'm convinced vinegar fixes everything. So yeah, I've tried vinegar.
Whatever the case.
Yeah.
Also, didn't Jesus spit in the dirt?
Made saliva.
And made with saliva and mixed the two and rubbed it on you, and you go to the river and wash.
That was the key.
There are sulfones.
Sulfur is a very abundant element in the earth's crust. So it'd be possible if you could accidentally come in contact with a nice concentration of whatever.
Yeah, or maybe they knew that, back then, because sulfur was a widespread mineral, but sulfonamides, or acids derived, might be able to treat it or something.
Got your smartphone?
Yeah, I got my smartphone. Super smart.
Well, the king's entourage, his head guy went to Elijah to be.
Yeah, Naaman.
Elijah told him to go down and jump in the river.
Maybe there was a high sulfur content in the Jordan River.
Well, that's not what I'm saying.
Well,
it's following God's instructions.
Yes, following. It was an act of faith. Because once one dip didn't do it, 2 dips didn't do it, 6 dips didn't do it. He went down that 7th time and came back up, and he had skin like a baby.
Right.
So, it's what I'm trying to say is this is a miraculous healing. And I think that even if the only time this was ever used was when Jesus came 1,600 years later and healed lepers miraculously.
Yeah, back then lepers were just cast out.
Basically, yeah. Yeah, they were just cast out. So, all right. Well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there was a treatment for it, and maybe there was a lot of use of this provision to come back into society before then. But I'd always been told that this provision was useless until Jesus came along,
Just like lime is a cure for scurvy.
Well, citrus fruit, yeah. Anything with vitamin C in it.
Probably
Yeah.
a bill for
Maybe
it
it's
now.
a possibility too that if a person looked like they had leprosy,
Yeah.
the priest said it was leprosy, and they went outside, and then in the sunshine, whatever,
It cleared up. Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
they wouldn't be condemned to being outside all the time. They would be able to come back in the.
Right.
So
Maybe.
misdiagnosis.
Right, misdiagnosis, that's exactly right. And the priest was supposed to look him over and then shut him up and quarantine him for 7 days and then look at him again and see if it still looked leprous or something. And so they had some medical knowledge back then, but...
of course, it sounds like that a priest is considered a doctor.
Well, it's interesting. Right. How knowledgeable about so many different things did a priest have to be, Of course, if he had to approve now, believe it or not, and I don't know much about this industry, but the Jews who want to eat kosher, there's rabbis who oversee the slaughtering of meat to prove that it's kosher, and so I don't know what it takes. Maybe if you don't like talking in front of people, you can sign up to be a butcher priest or a butcher rabbi instead of a teaching rabbi. I don't know, but that'd be a good question to ask somebody, I guess.
Did they have to burn their clothes?
Leprosy? Yeah. After they had leprosy, yeah. I believe that was part of it.
Is there a type of leprosy anymore?
There's leprosy in the world. There's leper colonies in other parts of the world still today. Yeah.
It's called Hansen's disease now.
It's called Hansen's disease?
And it says it takes 1 to 2 years of antibiotics to cure it.
Wow. That's a lot of antibiotics. Goodness. That's enough antibiotics to hurt you. Just about. I would think. Do what? Yeah, and you start to run into issues when you're on antibiotics for that long. So, is my understanding anyways. All right. Now, when did Israel get a king?
When did Israel
Get a king.
get a king?
Yeah,
Right after the judges.
after the judges. So 430 years of rule of the judges, and Israel says, we want a king, and God's opposed to it. And but, surprisingly enough, even though they have this argument 430 years later, there is a provision in the law in Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 14 through 20, When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me, like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. Now that computer's not supposed to have any noises. Oh, well, whatever. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother, only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again, and he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, approved by the Levitical priests. And it shall be with him, and he shall read in it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment, either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. And so this is interesting to me, that even though God is happy for them to not have a king for a long time, and even when they want a king, he tells them, no, you shouldn't have a king. God had already made a provision in there, and there's several things God says. No foreigners. Don't bring in a foreign king. Do what? That's right. It sets up a conflict of interest. So no foreign king, and he should not acquire many horses, because the Egyptians were champion horse breeders, and they had the chariots. I'm not sure if they invented the chariots. I think they perfected the chariot, and so they bred horses, and so God did not want a close relationship with Egypt. Unfortunately, Solomon breaks both rules. He marries the daughter of Egypt, and he has a fine collection of horses and chariots in his army, and he collects way too many wives, and they turn his heart. So there's just a lot of echoes of what is to come here in the law of Moses. All those foreign. And he didn't make them worship the one true God. They led him astray into worshiping all of the false gods. And so if he'd have had the influence on the other nations to where, yes, I'll make a treaty with you by marriage, but you're going to learn to worship the Lord, maybe God would have liked that better. But instead, they had an influence on him. But of course, Saul gets to reign for one generation. No dynasty from Saul. Then comes David. And that is the big one. There's going to be a descendant of David on the throne forever. And ultimately that is fulfilled in Jesus. They even put that over him when they crucified him, King of the Jews. And they ironically got it right. King of the Jews. And so I see now this, I told you, I got done studying for tonight, and I still had some types in there. This is kind of a type, not really a straight prophecy. Someday you're going to have a king. That comes when David is alive. God says you're going to have a descendant on the throne forever. That's more of a straight prophecy. This is more of a type as we talk about the kings of the earth. And then we move on into Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 15 through 22. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your brothers. It is to him you shall listen, just as you desired of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, or see this great fire any more, lest I die. And the Lord said to me, they are right in what they have spoken. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him, and whoever will not listen to my words that he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name that I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that same prophet shall die. And if you say in your heart, how may we know the word that the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass or come true, that is a word that the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You need not be afraid of him. And so this is a general prophecy about the fact that when Moses dies, someone else is going to take up the mantle, and God is going to see to it that we have a human leader in the nation of Israel. So after Moses is Joshua, and then a number of judges and kings and people. I thought it was interesting. Everyone looked at Mount Sinai when it was on fire on top and says, "Don't let that God talk to me, I'll die." So God sends Moses with the law, and God promises in this, you will always have a prophet like Moses. Ultimately, this is fulfilled in Jesus. Jesus is our human representative of God. And of course we believe that he is God, but he is like Moses in that he represents God to us, but on our level, on our human level that we can identify with. And so, ultimately...
They believed back then that on our level, we could not see God or
right.
even look at him. If we did, we'd die.
Right.
So we had to...
We have intermediaries.
Yeah.
We have intermediaries like Moses and ultimately like Jesus. And so if Jesus was standing here in his regular human form that he walked the earth in, no glowing, no halo, no nothing like that, but we would see a difference, but only, only in a human way, not in a supernatural way. But we have that prophet like Moses in Jesus. And then I was done, except for I turned a couple of pages thinking I better glance through the rest of Deuteronomy, not genealogy, Deuteronomy, and make sure there's nothing left that I want to point out. And I found one more thing, chapter 21, verses 22 and 23. And if a man has committed a crime punishable by death, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night on the tree, but you shall bury him the same day, for a hanged man is cursed by God. You shall not defile your land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance. Of course, the whole point to hanging up someone in view of everyone was to show everyone what happens when you mess with the authority. But God said, no, you don't leave him hanging there for days and days and days. You can have your little spectacle until the sun goes down. Then it's time to bury that body. We don't need, the revolt of the slave Spartacus in the Roman Empire. Supposedly they took all those slaves that revolted with him and just crucified them there was a major highway in the Roman Empire, and they just crucified one by one at intervals along that highway, so that everybody would see going by how terrible it is to revolt against the Roman authority. But of course, that really clutters up the landscape. If you just have dead bodies hanging everywhere, sure, maybe you've shown the world how powerful you are, but it's death. It's death all around. And God says the people of Israel are going to be different. You can warn away everybody from following his example for a day, but then you bury that body.
Also creates disease.
Yes. Yes. If a carrion bird carries off a piece of that guy and drops it somewhere else, and who knows, down a well maybe, I don't even know. You could have all kinds of issues. Go ahead and bury it. But of course, we who follow Jesus, where do our minds go? We go to the crucifixion. Jesus took our curse for us, and he was even cursed by God for hanging on a tree. When you do something so bad that they want to make an example of you in that way, and Jesus suffered that shame of being nailed to a cross on full display. His mom's over here crying. Everybody knows who he is, but God knew that when he wrote that in the law. There's coming someone who's going to be hanged on a tree that is going to suffer the ultimate curse. and therefore pay for the ultimate curse and break the ultimate curse so that it doesn't apply to you anymore. And so, yeah, it's a little bit of a type. The cursed man who's hanged on a tree is a type of Jesus who comes later and is suffering shame so that we can go free, so that we don't have to have shame anymore. Anything else from the law of Moses about Jesus?
When a person handles a dead body, like what we're talking about now,
Yeah.
there's a cleaning ritual they have to go through. Some rituals is for a day. They're cleaned by nightfall.
Right.
But on death, I'm not sure what is it, a week or something like that. I don't know. I don't remember. But there's specific cleansing rituals handling dead bodies.
Yeah, I don't think it's any longer.
It's in one of those, Moses
Yeah.
laws.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll look it up for you then. We'll see what. How did undertakers live? What did they have to deal with? They never got to go to synagogue. I don't know. Or the temple. I don't know. Yeah. Now, there's quite a bit about that with the Nazarites and the Levites. They definitely, and I don't know if maybe you're thinking about their rules, but the priests, if you were born into a priestly clan of the tribe of Levi, you were only even allowed to go to the funerals of immediate relatives. And if your sister was already married and in someone else's household, she didn't count. So the cleanliness ritual was a big deal. That's pretty extreme, I would think, but God had his rules, you know.
But isn't it amazing? God's people went to Egypt to be saved from starvation. And then when Jesus coming off of, and just what you read in Deuteronomy, don't go back there.
Right.
And then when Jesus was born, then he told Joseph to take it.
He spent time in Egypt, just like his ancestors. He was. Now he wasn't enslaved in Egypt, but he had to. Matthew tells us, I believe, that just like the Old Testament prophecy, "Out of Egypt I called my son," usually that refers to Israel. "Out of Egypt I called my son Israel." But Matthew points to it and says, "Out of Egypt I called my son," Jesus, you know. And so they left Egypt after being, once Herod died, they left Egypt.
See, we don't know God's mind. So,
right.
I mean, we don't even have how to comprehend anything that God does. And, you know, I listened to God preach the other day about, you know, people, good Christian people have really difficult times sometimes. You know, health-wise.
Oh, sure. Bad things happen to good people.
But in God's timing, it'll all come out. Where, you know, what we have to do is keep the faith that God's going to, you know, help us through that time.
In this lifetime, it may not.
I just think it's just miraculous that God sent his people there, and they've spent 400 years here, I'm sure.
They benefited from that.
Well,
they grew into a great nation.
They would have starved if they hadn't been there.
Right.
So God had that plan for Joseph to be where he was at the time he was, to do what he needed to do to help save the nation.
Yep. And he's another type of Christ. He goes into the belly of the beast first in order to make a path for them, you know. And so
like us today, if God's got a plan for us, he's speaking to us, we better listen. Just hear what he's got to say.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to
go home.
Yeah, I'm ready to go home. Amen. I'm going to close this in prayer. Father, we thank you for all you've given us. We thank you for your love and your kindness. And I just pray that you'll be with us as we continue whatever Christmas celebrations we still have online. Be with us as we take the youth group to Branson and hear some good preaching, some good evangelism, and some excellent songs and bands, and many of them who also share their testimonies and share about Jesus with us. Oh, Lord, be with our youth. I pray that they would open up not only to us but to you, and be open to your leading in their lives, O Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.